The Hells Angels biker found the little girl pinned against a frosted wall, and his violent rescue echoed through the valley. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's get into it. It was a bitterly cold night in the valley, the wind cutting through the trees like 1,000 sharp knives. The snow had been falling steadily for hours, blanketing the earth with an unforgiving layer of ice. The air was thick with the kind of stillness that only winter nights could bring, the kind of quiet that made every sound seem amplified. Then, out of the silence, a faint cry broke through the night. A sound so fragile and desperate it could only come from someone in grave danger. Jake Morrison, a seasoned Hells Angels biker, was riding through the storm, his Harley-Davidson cutting through the snow like a beast of steel. He was no stranger to the cold, to the kind of conditions that would send most people running for cover. But tonight, something felt different. As he rode through the snow-covered roads, his instincts, honed through years of being on the road and in the club, began to prick at him. The sound of the wind, the cry, it wasn't right. Jake's fingers tightened around the handlebars as he slowed his bike, scanning the road ahead. His eyes caught something in the distance, a figure, small and hunched, struggling against the harsh elements. It was a child, a little girl, no older than 8 or 9, trapped against a frozen wall. She was pinned there, her tiny body shivering violently, and her face twisted in terror. Without a second thought, Jake kicked his foot off the peg and guided his Harley towards the girl, his heart pounding in his chest. As he approached, he saw the fear in her eyes. She was freezing, her lips pale, and her body trembling uncontrollably. The sight of her, vulnerable and alone in the storm, stirred something in Jake. He had seen violence, had been part of the very thing that terrified most people. But this was different. This was a child in need of protection. Without hesitation, Jake dismounted from his bike and rushed toward the girl. She recoiled at the sight of him, the large, intimidating figure of a Hells Angels biker, his leather jacket gleaming under the moonlight, his face hardened by years of living on the edge. But Jake wasn't there to intimidate. He wasn't there to strike fear into her. He was there to save her. He knelt beside her, his voice soft and steady. "Hey, little one. It's okay. You're safe now." She flinched at his words, her wide eyes filled with suspicion and fear. She had every right to be afraid. After all, what kind of person would she expect to help her? A biker? A stranger? But Jake wasn't like the men who had terrorized her. He wasn't like the people who had caused her pain. Slowly, carefully, he extended his hand to her, his rough fingers gentle as he reached for her freezing hand. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice calm, a contrast to the storm raging around them. The little girl hesitated for a moment, her distrust written clearly on her face. But the warmth of his hand, the kindness in his voice, it was enough to make her take a chance. She reached out, her small hand slipping into his. Jake pulled her into his arms, cradling her against his chest to protect her from the cold. He could feel her shiver against him, her body so fragile in his strong arms. As he carried her toward his bike, he could feel her heartbeat, fast and erratic, but slowing down as she began to trust him. He wasn't sure how long she had been out here, alone in the storm, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her go. Not now. Not ever. I held the little girl close, trying to shield her from the cold. The snowstorm was relentless, each gust of wind cutting through the night like a knife, but I wasn't going to let her suffer out here. As I carried her to my Harley, I could feel her tiny body trembling against mine, her head buried in my chest, her face still pale from the cold. The wind howled around us, but the warmth of her small body gave me a sense of purpose. I knew I had to get her somewhere safe, somewhere she could rest and recover. As I laid her gently on the back of my bike, I could hear her soft, fearful breathing. Her eyes were closed, but her hands gripped my leather jacket tightly, as if she was afraid to let go. I slid into the seat and started the engine, the roar of the Harley breaking through the chaos of the storm. The familiar rumble beneath me gave me some comfort, but the worry for this little girl kept my mind racing. I wasn't sure how long she had been stranded in this storm, but I knew one thing for sure. She was freezing, and I was not going to let her face this alone. The roads were slick, the snow thickening with every mile, but I pushed forward, keeping my focus on the road ahead. The bike swerved slightly under the weight of the snow, but my grip on the handlebars was steady, my thoughts solely on the child behind me. As I made my way through the darkened streets of the valley, the lights from the few houses that lined the road seemed to offer some kind of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to push me to keep going. The wind screeched as I turned onto a secluded road leading to my garage, a place that had been my sanctuary for years. I needed to get her inside, warm her up, and make sure she was okay. Pulling up in front of the garage, I killed the engine and dismounted, taking the little girl in my arms once more. The snow had begun to settle, but her body was still shivering, and I could feel the cold in her bones. The garage door creaked as I opened it, and I stepped inside, grateful for the shelter from the storm. My garage was humble, tools scattered around, bikes parked in the corners, and the lingering scent of motor oil in the air. It was a world away from the chaos outside, a place where I could breathe easy. I quickly moved to the small cot I had set up in the corner for nights like this, and gently laid the girl down. She let out a soft sigh, her eyes fluttering open, as I pulled the blankets over her. "It's going to be okay," I said softly, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. She looked up at me with those wide, fearful eyes. I could tell she was scared, but there was something in her gaze that told me she was strong, stronger than she realized. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're safe now," I replied, trying to reassure her. "You're in my garage, out of the storm." She nodded slowly, but I could see the fear still lingering in her eyes. It wasn't just the cold that had her terrified. It was something deeper. "What's your name?" I asked, sitting beside her and offering a comforting smile. "Emily," she whispered, her voice barely a whisper. "Emily, you're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you," I said. She didn't respond, but I saw her grip the blankets tighter, as if she was trying to hold on to some semblance of safety. I wanted to tell her everything would be fine, but I knew I couldn't make any promises just yet. Not with the storm still raging outside, and not with whatever was going on in her life. As I sat there, watching over her, I couldn't help but think about my own past, how I'd been lost in a world of violence and chaos, never really knowing if I was doing the right thing. But seeing Emily here, seeing the trust she was slowly giving me, something shifted inside me. Maybe this was the redemption I'd been searching for, the peace I had longed for. But that didn't mean it was going to be easy. There were a lot of questions I still needed answers to, and something told me that Emily's story was far from over. As I sat by her side, the minutes dragged on, the weight of the silence thick between us. I could tell she was exhausted, her body finally succumbing to the warmth of the blankets, her breathing becoming steadier. But in the back of my mind, I knew I couldn't rest. Not yet. Not until I knew more about her, about what had brought her here, and why. I stood up slowly, my legs stiff from the long ride, and walked over to the workbench. I needed to think, to plan what came next. This wasn't just a random act of kindness. There was something bigger at play here, something that was bound to shake the foundation of the life I had built for myself. But for now, all I could do was wait. Wait for Emily to wake up, and wait for the storm to pass. And when she did, I'd be ready to find out what had brought her into my life. The answer, I feared, was going to be darker than either of us expected. I sat beside Emily as she slept, her small chest rising and falling steadily under the blankets. The storm had calmed a little outside, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still brewing. I had promised her safety, but I couldn't help but feel the weight of the responsibility on my shoulders. I had no idea where she'd come from, how she had ended up out there alone in the snow, but I knew one thing. She wasn't just some random victim. There was something more to her story, something I had to uncover. My thoughts were interrupted by a faint groan from Emily. Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, she looked disoriented. She glanced around the dimly lit garage, her eyes landing on me before she froze. I could see the fear in her eyes, the uncertainty, the worry that maybe she wasn't as safe as she hoped. "You're still here?" she whispered, her voice hoarse and weak. "Of course I am," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you." She didn't say anything for a while, just looked at me, as if weighing my words. Then, slowly, she sat up, her body stiff from the cold and the exhaustion. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice still quiet but a little stronger. "Jake. Jake Morrison." "Are you a good guy?" she asked, her eyes searching mine for any hint of deceit. I hesitated for a moment, not sure how to answer that. In the past, I had done things that didn't exactly make me a good guy. But that wasn't what mattered now. "I try to be," I said finally. She nodded, but I could see the uncertainty still in her eyes. "You saved me," she said softly, almost as if she were trying to convince herself. "Why?" I leaned back in my chair, watching her closely. I knew she had questions, and I couldn't blame her for being cautious. But I wasn't going to lie to her. "Because no one else was around to help you," I said. "And because, for some reason, I couldn't just ride away and leave you out there." Emily seemed to process this for a moment, her gaze flickering to the small cot where she had been lying just moments before. She took a deep breath and looked back at me. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You already have." She furrowed her brow, confused. "How?" "You're alive," I replied simply. The words felt hollow even as I said them, but they were true. If I hadn't found her, who knows what would have happened. The snowstorm had been relentless. I couldn't imagine her surviving out there much longer. "Why were you out there alone?" I asked, the question hanging in the air like a heavy weight. She flinched, her hands tightening around the blanket. I ran away," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "From my dad." I felt a sudden tightening in my chest. I didn't know what kind of father would do this to his own child, but I knew one thing. I didn't like it. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to," I said, my voice softening. "But I need to know what happened, Emily. I can't help you if I don't understand." She took a long, shaky breath, and for a moment, I thought she might not speak at all. But then, slowly, she began to tell me her story. She told me about her life, how things had slowly deteriorated at home. Her mother had passed away when she was young, and her father, who had once been loving, had turned cold and distant. As the years went by, his anger grew, and so did the violence. "I couldn't take it anymore," she said, her voice shaking. "So I left." I didn't know what to say to that. The thought of a child running away from home, especially one as young as Emily, made my blood boil. But I didn't push her for more details. I just listened. "You're safe now," I said, trying to reassure her. "You're not alone." She didn't look convinced. I could see the sadness in her eyes, the heaviness of what she had been through. But for the first time, I saw a flicker of something else, hope. I wasn't sure what came next for her, but I knew one thing. I wasn't letting her go. Not until I knew she was okay. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. "I don't know," she replied, her voice uncertain. "I don't have anywhere to go." I leaned forward, the weight of my promise to her settling in my chest. "You'll stay here," I said firmly. "I'll help you figure things out. You don't have to go anywhere right now. You're safe here." Emily looked at me for a long time, as if deciding whether or not to trust me. I didn't blame her. But after a long pause, she finally nodded, her eyes tired but grateful. "Thank you, Jake," she said softly. "Thank you for saving me." The words hit me harder than I expected. I had saved her, yes, but I had also saved myself. In a world where everything felt like it was falling apart, this was the first time in a long time that I felt like I was doing something right. I wasn't sure what the future held for Emily or for me, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could both start over. As the storm outside began to subside, I knew one thing. This was only the beginning. Whatever came next, we would face it together. I could see Emily's eyes growing heavier as the warmth from the blankets enveloped her. The night outside was still cold and relentless, but inside the garage, there was a sense of calm, a fragile peace that I wasn't used to. She was asleep now, her breathing steady, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the calm before the storm. There was so much she hadn't told me yet. As the minutes passed, I stood up and walked over to the window, staring out at the snow-covered landscape. It was quiet now, the winds dying down, but the silence felt heavier than ever. I had promised Emily that she was safe, but I wasn't sure how long that would last. I couldn't protect her from everything. My thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was low, hesitant, but I knew who it was. I opened the door to find one of the older men from the club, Marcus. He was standing in the doorway, his eyes scanning the garage as if he could smell trouble from a mile away. "Jake," he said, his voice gruff, We need to talk. I nodded and stepped aside to let him in. He was one of the few people I trusted, but that didn't mean he was always easy to deal with. What's going on? I asked, closing the door behind him. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. What's this about a kid? You're bringing kids into this now. The question hit me like a slap in the face. Marcus had always been the kind of guy who lived by the rules of the Brotherhood, no exceptions. But this was different. I wasn't sure how much I should tell him, how much I could say without causing more problems. She was out there in the storm, I said quietly. I couldn't leave her. Marcus didn't answer right away. He just stood there, taking in the sight of Emily curled up in the corner, sleeping. After a long pause, he spoke again. You know this is dangerous, right? The club doesn't exactly take kindly to distractions. And this girl, whoever she is, could bring trouble. We've got enough problems without having to deal with a kid. His words were sharp, but there was an edge of concern in his voice that made me pause. She's not a distraction, I said firmly, my voice low. She's just a kid, Marcus. She needs help. Marcus studied me for a moment, his gaze lingering on Emily before he spoke again. You're playing with fire, Jake. You're too close to this. If the wrong people find out about her, we could all be in deep trouble. You need to think about this. I felt my jaw tighten. He was right, in a way. The club's code had always been clear. Family first, but business came before everything. If Emily's presence in my life endangered that, I knew I'd have to make a choice. But I wasn't ready to make that choice just yet. Not when I'd promised her safety. I'll take care of it, I said finally, my voice steady. You don't have to worry about it. Marcus didn't look convinced, but he didn't push any further. He just nodded, his expression hardening. Just be careful, Jake. The club doesn't forget things like this. As he left, I closed the door behind him and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. The storm outside had stopped, but the storm inside my mind was just beginning. I had to keep Emily safe, but I wasn't sure how long I could protect her without causing more problems for myself and everyone around me. The club wasn't exactly known for its patience when it came to distractions, and I knew Marcus wasn't the only one who would have a problem with me taking on this responsibility. I glanced over at Emily, still sleeping soundly. She had no idea what kind of world she had just walked into, and I wasn't sure I could shield her from it forever. But for now, she was safe. That was all that mattered. As I sat down next to her, I found myself wondering how long that safety would last. The club wasn't the only threat out there. Emily's past was a dark one, and I had no idea what kind of people she was running from. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't letting her face it alone. Not now, not ever. I had made a promise, and I was going to keep it, no matter the cost. I sat in the dimly lit garage, the faint sound of the storm outside barely audible now, the wind subsiding into a haunting whisper. Emily was still asleep, tucked into the blankets, but I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to change. The moment Marcus left, the weight of what I was doing settled heavily on my chest. I had taken Emily in, promised her safety, but I wasn't sure how long that promise could hold. The club wasn't exactly fond of surprises, especially ones that involved people they didn't know. And Emily was a surprise, a complication I hadn't expected. I glanced over at her, watching her breathe slowly in her sleep, and for a moment, I saw nothing but a scared little girl who needed protection. But that wouldn't last. People like Marcus and the rest of the club wouldn't just let her stay here indefinitely. They'd want answers, and I had no answers to give them. The clock on the wall ticked louder in the silence, and as the minutes dragged on, I couldn't help but think of Emily's past. I had to know more about her. What had driven her to run away? Who had she been running from? I knew she hadn't been the one to cause the trouble. It wasn't in her nature. But someone had hurt her, and if I was going to protect her, I had to understand who that someone was. I stood up, walking over to my bike. It wasn't much, just a Harley Davidson, old and beaten up, but it was mine, and it was my only escape. I grabbed my jacket and pulled it on, my thoughts racing. The road outside was dark, the streetlights casting long shadows as I walked to the bike. I needed to clear my head, think things through. But first, I needed to find answers. The storm had passed, but the valley was still cold, too cold for someone like Emily to be out in it. I couldn't afford to let her go back to that life. As I started the engine and rode out of the garage, I glanced back at the little cabin I had built. It was just a place to hide from the past, but now it felt like the only safe place for her. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I couldn't just sit and wait for things to come to me. I needed to take action. The road was empty, the lights of the small town dimming in the distance. I drove through the winding roads, the wind against my face sharp and biting, but I didn't care. I had to find out what had happened to Emily. The only place I could think to go was the diner. It was the one place in town where people still talked. If anyone knew anything about Emily, it would be the waitress there. I pulled into the parking lot, killing the engine and stepping off the bike. The place was nearly empty, just a few locals sitting at the counter, sipping coffee. I pushed open the door and walked inside, my boots clanging on the tile floor. The waitress, a woman named Sarah, looked up from the coffee pot as I approached. Her eyes widened when she saw me, but she didn't say anything. "I need to talk to you," I said quietly, my voice low but steady. She hesitated for a moment before nodding, gesturing for me to sit at the counter. I slid into one of the stools, keeping my gaze steady on her. "What do you know about a little girl named Emily?" I asked. Her face shifted slightly, a flash of recognition crossing her eyes. "She's been in here a few times," Sarah said, her voice quiet, almost cautious. "She doesn't have much family. Her dad's, well, he's not the kind of guy anyone wants to talk about." My heart sank as she spoke. I had been right. There was something darker lurking in Emily's past, something that had pushed her to run. "What happened to her?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Sarah glanced around, making sure no one was listening before she leaned in. "Her dad, he's got a temper," she said, her voice low. "I don't know all the details, but I've seen him yell at her a few times. No one talks about it, but we all know. She came in once, looked like she hadn't eaten in days. She didn't say much, just sat there, stared out the window, and left without a word." I clenched my fists, the anger rising in my chest. "Where is she now?" I asked, the urgency in my voice unmistakable. "She ran," Sarah said, glancing down. "A few days ago. Didn't tell anyone where she was going. But if you're asking about her, I figure you're the one she trusts." I nodded. "I need to find her. Do you know where she might have gone?" Sarah paused, thinking for a moment. "I don't know for sure, but there's a cabin outside of town. It's empty most of the time, but she's been there before. It's secluded, so no one would bother her." I stood up, throwing a few bills on the counter. "Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate it." She nodded but didn't say anything more. As I left the diner and made my way back to my bike, I knew I was getting closer to the truth. Emily's past was darker than I'd thought, but it wasn't over yet. I wasn't about to let her face it alone. The storm had passed, but the real storm was just beginning. I kicked the bike to life, the engine roaring as I rode off toward the cabin, determined to find her before anyone else could. This time, no one was going to take her away from me. I rode through the winding roads, the familiar hum of the Harley beneath me doing little to calm the tension building in my chest. The storm had finally passed, but a different kind of storm was brewing. I had to find Emily before it was too late, before whoever had been chasing her caught up with her. The cabin Sarah mentioned was about 10 miles outside of town, deep in the woods. The road was barely more than a dirt trail, covered with snow and ice from the storm, making it hard to navigate. But I knew the way. I had ridden these roads before, although never in conditions like this. The trees towered over me, their branches heavy with snow, the world around me eerily silent. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I had been in enough dangerous situations to recognize the signs of a trap, but this time, the threat wasn't mine alone. It was Emily's. The bike slid slightly as I turned a corner, the gravel and ice making every movement feel like a gamble. The cold bit into my skin, but I kept going, my mind focused on the task ahead. Emily. I had promised to protect her, and I wasn't about to fail her now. As I neared the cabin, I slowed the bike, scanning the area for any signs of movement. The cabin itself was small, tucked between the trees, and from the outside, it looked abandoned. No lights, no smoke rising from the chimney. But something about the silence felt off. I killed the engine and dismounted, the crunch of the snow beneath my boots the only sound breaking the stillness. My breath clouded in the air as I approached the door. I didn't know what to expect when I stepped inside. It could be empty, or it could be exactly what I feared, a hiding place for someone who meant harm. I pushed open the door cautiously, the creak of the wood sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet. The interior was as bare as the outside, with only the barest necessities, an old chair by a small, cold fireplace, a dusty table, and a few blankets tossed around. But Emily wasn't there. My heart sank, and I quickly scanned the room again, searching for any sign of her. Nothing. No footprints, no recent warmth. She had been here, but now she was gone. Panic started to rise in my chest, but I fought to control it. I couldn't afford to lose my head. I needed answers. I stepped further inside, my mind racing. Where could she have gone? Who was she running from? The sudden sound of footsteps outside snapped me out of my thoughts. I froze, listening intently. There was someone out there. My hand instinctively moved to the knife I carried on my belt, my muscles tense as I waited for the sound to get closer. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. My heart skipped a beat as I saw the face. It was Marcus. "Jake," he said, his voice low but carrying a hint of urgency. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer immediately. I couldn't. My thoughts were still racing, trying to process everything at once. Marcus stepped inside fully, looking around the cabin. "Where's the girl?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. "She's gone," I replied, my voice low, controlled. "She was here, but she's not now." Marcus's face hardened. "This was a mistake, Jake. You don't get involved with this. You don't know who she's running from." "I don't care who she's running from," I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. "I promised to protect her, and I'm going to keep that promise." Marcus didn't respond right away. He just stood there, staring at me, as if weighing the situation. I could see the concern in his eyes, but there was something else, something darker. "Jake, you don't understand," he said finally, his voice low. "This goes deeper than you think. People like her father, they don't just let go. There are others looking for her, and they won't stop until they find her." His words hit me like a punch. "Her father?" I asked, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice grim. "Her father's bad news. And he's not the only one. There are people in this town who would rather see her dead than let her get away." I felt my blood run cold. The reality of the situation was hitting me all at once. Emily wasn't just a runaway. She was a target. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice tight with anger and fear. "We need to find her," Marcus said, his expression hardening. "Before they do." We left the cabin. Together, both of us silent as we walked back to the bikes. I could feel the weight of his words hanging between us, a new sense of urgency in the air. Emily was out there somewhere, and I had no idea who was hunting her. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them get to her. I wasn't going to let her become another casualty of a world she didn't deserve to be a part of. As we rode back into the town, my mind raced with thoughts of what I could do next. Emily was in danger, and I was going to find her before it was too late. I rode in silence. The roar of the Harley's engine, the only sound breaking the heavy stillness between Marcus and me. My mind was consumed with thoughts of Emily, but every time I tried to focus on her, I couldn't stop thinking about the danger that was closing in. Marcus was right. This wasn't just a runaway girl. Her father's actions had set something much darker into motion, and now, whoever was after her wasn't going to stop until they found her. The feeling of unease settled into the pit of my stomach. The clock was ticking, and every second that passed brought her closer to being found. I needed to act fast. We didn't have time to waste. We reached the outskirts of town, where the road split off into two directions, one leading into the quieter parts of town, the other into the woods, toward the cabin where Emily had been hiding. Marcus glanced over at me, his eyes filled with the kind of determination I hadn't seen in him in a while. He knew this wasn't just a run-of-the-mill problem. It was personal now. "We'll split up," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You check the cabin again. See if you can find anything that'll lead us to her. I'll ask around, see if anyone's heard anything. She's not just hiding from her father. There's a whole network of people that might be looking for her." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words sink in. "Got it," I said. "Be careful, Marcus. We don't know who's out there." "You too, Jake," he replied. "If you find anything, don't wait for me. Get out of there." I watched as he turned and disappeared. Down the road toward the town, his bike's headlights fading into the darkness. My heart was heavy as I made my way back to the cabin. The snow had picked up again, making the road even harder to navigate, but I had no choice. I had to find Emily. I arrived at the cabin in no time, the snow crunching beneath my boots as I walked toward the door. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe signs that she had returned, a clue that would lead me to her. But the place was just as quiet as before. There was nothing left behind, not even a sign of struggle. The air was thick with the lingering scent of damp wood and cold, and the silence pressed in on me, making it hard to think straight. I stepped inside, scanning the room one last time, trying to notice something I might have missed. There had to be something. As I looked around, my gaze fell on the floor near the corner. There, half hidden under a pile of old blankets, was a small notebook. I knelt down, my heart racing as I picked it up. It was worn, the edges frayed, but it was clearly important. I opened it carefully, scanning the pages. The handwriting was messy, rushed, but legible. It was Emily's. The words were a jumble of fear, confusion, and desperation, but there was one thing that stood out. Names. Several names, crossed out, but they were there, written in a hurried scrawl. My eyes lingered on one name in particular, Tom. I didn't recognize it, but something about it nagged at me. I flipped to the next page and found a list of locations, some of which I recognized, others I didn't. There was an address near the outskirts of town, one I knew too well, an abandoned warehouse. My mind raced. Could she have gone there? Could it be another safe house? Or was it another part of her escape plan? I shoved the notebook into my jacket and hurried out of the cabin. I needed to find Marcus, and fast. I mounted my bike and sped toward town, hoping he'd be there, hoping we could put the pieces together before it was too late. I didn't know if Emily had gone to the warehouse or if it was just another dead end, but I had no time to waste. The wind stung my face as I pushed the bike harder, my thoughts focused on one thing: getting to Emily before anyone else did. When I arrived in town, I didn't see Marcus anywhere. The streets were eerily quiet, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I pulled into the diner's parking lot, hoping to find him there, but the place was empty. The door creaked open as I stepped inside. The warmth of the diner was a relief from the cold outside, but it did little to ease the tension building in my chest. I scanned the room, hoping for any sign of Marcus. And then I saw him. He was sitting at the counter, his hands folded in front of him, his eyes staring straight ahead. He didn't look up when I entered, and I could see that something was weighing on him. I walked over and sat down next to him. "Marcus," I said quietly. He looked at me, his eyes heavy with something I couldn't read. "She's gone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She left last night. I tried to find her, but it's like she disappeared into thin air." My heart sank. I had hoped to find some sign, some way to track her, but now it seemed like we were at a dead end. "What about the warehouse?" I asked, my voice tight. Marcus paused for a long moment before responding. "I don't know, but if she's going there, we need to find her now." We both stood up, walking out of the diner together. I knew one thing. We couldn't waste any more time. Whatever was waiting for us at the warehouse, we had to get there first. Emily's life depended on it. I could feel the tension in the air as Marcus and I made our way toward the warehouse. The engine of my bike roared through the streets, and the cold night air stung my face as I focused on the road ahead. I didn't know what we were going to find at the warehouse, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. The place had been abandoned for years, a dark, foreboding structure that felt like the perfect hiding spot for someone trying to escape the world. My mind raced with thoughts of Emily. Had she gone there on her own? Or was someone with her? And who was hunting her down? The answer had to be somewhere in that warehouse. The closer we got, the more the sense of dread gnawed at me. It was late, and the area around the warehouse was deserted. The streetlights flickered, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. I could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on me, but I couldn't stop now. I had made a promise to protect Emily, and I was going to keep it, no matter what. We reached the warehouse, parking our bikes behind an old, rusted fence. It was hard to see much in the dim light, but I could make out the outline of the building. I signaled to Marcus to stay quiet as we approached. The cold air bit at my skin as I led the way, my boots crunching on the gravel. I checked the doors, but they were locked. There had to be another way in. I walked along the side of the building, scanning for a window or a weak spot. Marcus followed closely behind, his expression serious. As we rounded the corner, I spotted a small, broken window high up on the wall. It was just big enough for us to get through if we were careful. I looked over at Marcus, and without saying a word, he nodded. We would have to climb to reach it. The cold night felt even sharper as we scaled the wall, our hands scraping against the rough surface. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I couldn't stop now. We had to find Emily. Once we made it to the window, I peered inside. It was dark, and I couldn't see much at first, but I could make out the faint outline of crates and old furniture scattered around the space. It was empty, no sign of anyone, not yet. I carefully pulled myself through the window, landing softly on the floor below. Marcus followed right behind me, and together we crept into the shadows. The warehouse smelled musty, like old wood and rust, and the air felt thick with dust. We moved cautiously, listening for any sound, any sign that someone was here. I could feel the tension building in my chest, my muscles tense and ready for anything. "Stay close," I whispered to Marcus, my voice barely audible. We moved deeper into the warehouse, the faint light from the street filtering in through the cracks in the walls. It was too quiet, too still. Then I heard it. A soft sound, a whisper of movement. My heart skipped a beat, and I motioned for Marcus to stop. We waited in the silence, listening intently. There it was again, footsteps. Quiet, deliberate. Someone was here, and it wasn't just Emily. "She's here," I murmured, my voice tight. We followed the sound, keeping to the shadows, moving slowly so as not to alert anyone. The footsteps led us to a small room in the back of the warehouse. The door was slightly ajar, and from the faint light inside, I could see shadows moving. I motioned to Marcus, signaling for him to stay back while I approached the door. I crept forward, my hand on the door handle, my breath shallow. I pushed it open just a crack, enough to peer inside. There she was, Emily. But she wasn't alone. Standing over her was a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a dark jacket, his back to the door. Emily was sitting on the floor, her arms wrapped around her knees, her face pale and drawn. She looked terrified. The man was speaking to her, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. My blood ran cold. This was it. The danger I had feared was here, but I wasn't going to let him take her. I gripped the door handle tighter, feeling the anger rise in me. I wasn't going to wait for him to hurt her. Not this time. I pushed the door open forcefully, stepping into the room. The man turned at the sound, his eyes widening when he saw me. Without thinking, I rushed forward, my fists flying. The man barely had time to react as I landed a blow to his jaw. He staggered back, surprised by the sudden attack, but he quickly regained his footing. The next few moments were a blur of movement, grappling, struggling, punches thrown in quick succession. The man was strong, but I was fueled by rage, by the need to protect Emily. Finally, I managed to get him in a headlock, pulling him to the ground. He struggled, but I held on, tightening my grip until he stopped fighting back. I could hear Emily's soft sobs behind me, and I turned. To see her trembling, her wide eyes full of fear and relief. I stood up, breathing heavily, my body tense but relieved. "You're safe now," I said quietly, turning to Emily. She didn't move at first, but when she saw me, something in her expression softened. I walked over to her slowly, kneeling down to her level. "It's okay. He's not going to hurt you anymore." Emily slowly looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and gratitude. I could see the trust beginning to form, the bond growing stronger between us. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but it carried so much weight. I nodded, not knowing what to say. I had promised her safety, and I had kept that promise. But this wasn't over. The man might have been taken down, but there were others out there, and I wasn't going to stop until I had answers. We weren't out of danger yet. The storm outside had passed, but the real storm was just beginning. I stood over the man, still breathing heavily from the struggle, his face bruised and bloodied, his body sprawled out on the floor of the warehouse. Emily was safe for now, but the feeling of dread that had been gnawing at me since the moment I found her still lingered. I didn't know who he was or what his connection to Emily was, but he wasn't the only one involved. This man was just a pawn in something much bigger. I turned to Emily, who was still sitting against the wall, her eyes wide with a mixture of relief and fear. She was trembling, but there was a look of hope starting to form in her eyes, something I hadn't seen before. The trust one had fought so hard to earn was beginning to settle into her, and I wasn't about to let anyone take that away from her. I walked over to her, kneeling down and offering my hand. She looked at it for a moment before slowly reaching out, her small fingers grasping mine. I helped her up, careful not to jostle her too much. "You okay?" I asked softly, trying to keep my voice steady despite the chaos that had just unfolded. She nodded, but the fear hadn't fully left her eyes. "I'm okay," she whispered. "But who was that man? Why was Here. Her voice trembled with the question, the uncertainty in her tone pulling at me. I paused, unsure how much to tell her. The truth was, I didn't have all the answers myself. But I couldn't leave her in the dark any longer. I don't know yet, I said, my voice low but firm. But I'm going to find out. We're not done yet. She looked up at me, searching my face for something. Maybe reassurance, maybe answers. I didn't have either of those things to offer her, but I did have one thing, my promise. You're safe now, I added, as much for myself as for her. I won't let anyone hurt you. I helped her walk toward the door, my eyes still scanning the shadows of the warehouse, making sure no one else was waiting in the dark. The storm outside had completely stopped now, but I wasn't about to relax. We had to keep moving. I needed to get Emily back to the garage, get her someplace where she could rest, and figure out our next move. As we made our way out of the warehouse, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. It wasn't even close. We had barely scratched the surface. I could hear the distant hum of my bike as we stepped outside, the cold air rushing in to greet us. I glanced over at Emily, who was still holding onto my arm, her grip light but steady. We'll figure this out, I said, more to reassure myself than anything else. We climbed onto the bikes, and I started the engine. The sound of the Harley filled the night, and for a moment, it drowned out everything else. As we headed back toward town, I kept my eyes on the road ahead, trying to think of a plan, of what came next. But the truth was, I didn't have a plan. Not yet. The only thing I knew for sure was that we couldn't stop. Not until Emily was safe. The ride back to the garage felt longer than it should have, the weight of the situation settling deeper into my chest with every passing minute. We couldn't stay in one place for too long. I knew that now. The moment we stopped, the moment we relaxed, that was the moment we'd be found. The moment everything we had worked for would be lost. As we pulled into the garage, I could see the faint light from inside. The place was still standing, still the sanctuary it had been when I first built it. But now it felt different. Heavier. Emily slid off the bike, and I helped her inside, the door creaking as we entered. The familiar smell of motor oil and leather hit me, a scent I had always associated with safety, with home. But now, it didn't feel like home. Not anymore. Emily walked over to the cot I had set up in the corner, her footsteps slow and measured. She sat down, pulling the blanket tightly around her as she stared at the floor. I could see the exhaustion in her posture, the weight of everything she had been through settling onto her small shoulders. I walked over to her and crouched down. You need anything? I asked, my voice softer now. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with gratitude. But there was still something else there, something I couldn't quite name. I'm okay, she said, but the tremor in her voice gave her away. She wasn't okay. None of us were. I walked over to the workbench and grabbed a glass of water, bringing it to her. She took it from me without a word, her fingers trembling slightly as she drank. I sat down beside her, both of us quiet for a moment, the only sound the hum of the garage. Finally, Emily spoke. What now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't have an answer for her. Not yet. But I knew one thing. We would face whatever came next together. We had to. I looked at her, my gaze steady. Now we figure out who's behind all of this. And we stop them. She nodded, and for the first time since I found her, I saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. It was small, barely there, but it was enough. I stood up, the weight of the promise still heavy on my chest. The night wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for the first time, I felt like maybe we had a chance. I woke up to the first light of dawn creeping through the small, grimy window of the garage. The silence in the room felt heavier today, almost suffocating. Emily was still asleep, wrapped in the blanket I had given her, her face peaceful for the first time since I found her. But I couldn't rest. The promise I made to keep her safe wasn't something I could take lightly, not when I had no idea who was out there hunting her, or how deep this situation went. The man I knocked out at the warehouse, he was just the tip of the iceberg. I didn't know who he worked for, or who was pulling the strings, but I knew I had to find out before it was too late. I stood up, stretching my stiff muscles, and walked over to the workbench. The remnants of last night's chaos still lay scattered around. Tools, broken equipment, papers, and the notebook I found in Emily's bag was staring back at me. I had to look at it again. Maybe I missed something, a clue that could point me in the right direction. I opened it carefully, flipping through the pages. Emily's handwriting was frantic, hurried. She had written down names, locations, and one name in particular stood out, Tom. It was the same name I had seen the night before in the warehouse, the one that seemed to mean something. But who was Tom? Was it her father's name, or someone else? I couldn't figure it out yet, but I knew I had to find Tom, whatever that meant. I shoved the notebook back into my jacket pocket, determined to get some answers. I needed help. I needed Marcus. I walked outside and grabbed my jacket, stepping into the cold morning air. The snow had stopped falling, but the chill was still biting. The town was quiet, almost too quiet, like everyone was holding their breath. I started the bike and headed into town, the roar of the engine breaking the stillness as I rode toward the diner. Marcus was bound to be there. He had connections, people he could talk to. We needed to track down Tom, and the clock was ticking. When I got to the diner, I didn't see Marcus right away, so I sat at the counter and ordered a cup of coffee. The smell of brewing coffee filled the air, and for a moment, it almost felt normal. But nothing was normal anymore. I had no idea where Emily was, or what kind of people were after her. I couldn't keep her hidden forever, and sooner or later, someone would find us. As I sipped the coffee, I noticed Sarah, the waitress, walking toward me. She looked tired, worn out from the late-night shift. "You still looking for the girl?" she asked, her voice low, almost hesitant. I looked up at her. "Yeah," I said, my voice tight. "I need to know where she went. I need to find her before anyone else does." Sarah hesitated, her gaze flickering over her shoulder toward the door. "You've got to be careful, Jake. There are things happening that you don't understand. People you don't want to mess with. They're looking for her, and they won't stop until they get her." I leaned forward, my grip on the coffee cup tightening. "I don't care who they are. I won't let them get her." Sarah looked at me for a moment, studying my face, before she spoke again. "There's a guy, Tom," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He's connected to some people in town. People who have a lot of influence. If he's involved with her, you need to know he's dangerous." My heart skipped a beat. Tom. That was the name in the notebook. I couldn't believe it. "Where can I find him?" I asked, my voice low but insistent. Sarah didn't respond right away. She looked around the diner, as if making sure no one was listening. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "There's an old barn on the outskirts of town. He goes there sometimes. But you have to be careful. He's not someone you want to get too close to. The people he's connected to, they won't hesitate to make you disappear." My mind was racing as I absorbed her words. Tom. The barn. It was my only lead, but it was dangerous. I had no choice. I had to find Emily. I stood up, throwing a few bills on the counter, and walked toward the door. "Thanks, Sarah," I said over my shoulder. "I'll be careful." She didn't say anything else, just nodded and went back to her duties. I knew she was worried, but I couldn't let fear control me. Emily needed me. I mounted the bike, feeling the familiar weight of the engine beneath me, but it was different this time. This wasn't just a ride. This was the start of something much bigger. As I made my way out of town, my mind kept racing back to Emily. What kind of people were after her? What had she seen? What had she gone through? I didn't have answers, but I was going to get them. The barn wasn't far, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. But there was no turning back now. I wasn't going to stop until I found out everything I needed to know. The road stretched out before me, the wind biting at my face, but I didn't feel the cold. I was already too deep into this, and I wasn't about to back down. The barn loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, and I knew that whatever happened next would change everything. I just hoped I was ready. I could feel the weight of the night pressing down on me as I approached the barn. The road had been long, and with every mile, the sense of dread that had been building only intensified. My hands tightened on the handlebars of the Harley, the cold night air slicing through my jacket, but I barely noticed it. All I could think about was getting answers. The barn stood in front of me, a dark silhouette against the moonlit sky, its broken windows and weathered wood giving it a sinister look. It had the feel of a place where secrets were buried, where people who didn't want to be found hid from the world. I slowed my bike as I neared the entrance, the gravel crunching under the tires as I stopped just outside. There were no lights inside, no sounds, just an eerie silence. I cut the engine and got off the bike, my boots thudding against the ground. The cold was seeping through my clothes, but I didn't care. I had a mission now, and nothing else mattered. I walked toward the barn, keeping low, my instincts screaming that something wasn't right. As I reached the door, I stopped, taking a moment to listen. No voices, no movement, just the quiet of the night. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears as I slowly pushed open the creaky door. It gave way with a soft groan, and I stepped inside. The darkness was thick, but my eyes adjusted quickly, scanning the area. The barn was filled with old crates and broken equipment, just like I expected. But then, I saw something that made my stomach drop, a figure standing in the corner, watching me. My hand instinctively went to the knife at my belt, but I didn't pull it out. I needed answers, not another fight. "You must be Jake," the figure said, his voice deep and calm, but with an edge of warning. I couldn't see his face clearly, but I could tell he was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that made the air feel thicker. I didn't respond right away, just studied him. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the tightness in my chest. The man chuckled, a low, almost amused sound. "Name's Tom," he said, taking a step forward into the dim light. I could finally make out his face, sharp features, dark eyes, and a scar running down his left cheek. He looked like someone who had spent his whole life making enemies. "You're looking for Emily, right?" he asked, his gaze fixed on me. My heart skipped a beat. This was the man. Tom. The one Emily had written about. The one who was part of the reason she was on the run. "Where is she?" I asked, my voice hard. "I'm not here to hurt her," Tom said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "But she's not with me anymore. You're a little late to the party." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, she's not with you?" I demanded. Tom shrugged, his movements slow and deliberate. "She's been running from her father, from people like me. She doesn't understand what she's gotten herself into." I stepped closer, my fists clenching at my sides. "Where is she?" I repeated, my voice rising. Tom's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. "You think you're going to save her? You're just a biker, Jake. You have no idea what you're up against. There's no running from this." His words hit me harder than I expected. I had been so focused on keeping Emily safe, I hadn't thought about what I was really up against. Tom wasn't just a man to be beaten into submission. He was connected to something much bigger, something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. But I couldn't stop now. I wouldn't. "Where is she?" I asked again, my voice low and dangerous. Tom sighed, almost as if he were bored by the whole thing. "She went to the old house," he said, his tone dismissive. "Her father's place. You think she can just walk away from that life? She's tied to it, whether she likes it or not." The word struck me like a punch to the gut. Emily was back at her father's place. I knew the house. It was where she had run from in the first place, the place she was trying to escape. But now, it seemed like she had no choice but to return. I couldn't let that happen. I turned on my heel and headed toward the door, my mind already racing with the plan. I had to get to Emily before anyone else did. "You'll never get there in time," Tom called after me, his voice laced with something that sounded almost like pity. I didn't answer him. There was no time for more words. I had a daughter to protect. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I ran out of the barn and to my bike. The engine roared to life, and I was off, the cold wind stinging my face as I sped toward the house. The miles seemed to stretch on forever, the darkness of the night closing in around me. But I didn't stop. Not until I was there, not until I had Emily. The house came into view, a dark silhouette against the starry sky. My heart pounded in my chest. She was in there, and I was going to get her out. The headlights of my bike illuminated the driveway, casting long shadows across the ground. I cut the engine and dismounted, my eyes scanning the area. The house was quiet, too quiet. I moved slowly, my heart racing as I approached the door. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I couldn't turn back now. I knocked on the door, my fist banging against the wood. Silence. Then the sound of footsteps inside. The door creaked open, and a man stepped out. He looked at me, and I could tell from his expression that he knew exactly who I was. "Jake," he said, his voice cold. "Looking for Emily, I take it?" I stood in front of the door, my hand still hovering over the brass handle, staring at the man who had just stepped out. He looked like he had been waiting for me, his eyes cold and calculating, the kind of man who wasn't easily rattled. His face was familiar, but I couldn't place him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a rugged look that suggested he had spent a lifetime doing hard work. But it wasn't his appearance that made my stomach churn. It was the way he looked at me, like I was already a problem he had to deal with. I could feel the anger rising inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I wasn't here to fight. Not yet, anyway. "Looking for Emily, I take it?" he asked, his voice flat, almost bored. I nodded, keeping my tone even. Where is she? The man stepped forward slightly, closing the door behind him with a slow, deliberate movement. She's inside, he said, as if that was supposed to answer everything. But you're not going to just walk in and take her, Jake. It doesn't work like that. The way he said my name, with that touch of familiarity, made my skin crawl. I didn't know who this guy was, but I knew one thing. He was not someone I could trust. I wasn't about to back down now. I'm taking her out of here, I said, my voice low but firm. You can either make this easy, or we can do this the hard way. Your choice. The man chuckled, a humorless sound that didn't sit right with me. You think you can just walk in here and take her? You're in over your head, Jake. There's a lot you don't know, a lot you're not seeing. His words hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I had a feeling he was right. There was more to this than just a runaway girl. I had barely scratched the surface. I couldn't let that stop me. I'm not leaving without her, I said, my voice colder now, filled with determination. I don't care what you're involved in. This is between me and her. The man stared at me for a long moment, his face unreadable, before he spoke again. It's not that simple, he said, his voice softening slightly. She's tangled up in something far bigger than you think. You think you're saving her, but you're just pulling her into a bigger mess. The people after her? They're not the kind of people you can just walk away from. And you, Jake, you're already too deep into it. You don't even know who you're up against. I felt a flicker of doubt, but I pushed it away. I couldn't back off now. I had made a promise to protect Emily, and I wasn't going to let anything stop me. I'm not afraid of whoever is after her, I said, my voice steely. I'm not afraid of you either. I'm taking her with me, and that's final. The man's expression hardened, and for a moment, I thought he might try something. But instead, he sighed, like he had already made up his mind about something. I'm not going to stop you, he said, his voice heavy with something I couldn't quite place. But you need to understand, Jake. When you walk away from this, it's not just you that's in danger. You're dragging her into this, too. And when the people she's running from find out what you've done, they won't stop. They won't leave her alone. His words hung in the air like a threat, but I didn't flinch. I had already made my decision. I'm not leaving her here, I repeated, my voice hard. I don't care what you say. I won't let her face this alone. The man looked at me for a long time, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. He was torn, but he didn't make a move to stop me. Slowly, he stepped aside, his face unreadable. Go ahead, he said, his voice almost a whisper. But you'll be making a mistake. I didn't need to hear any more. I pushed past him and walked into the house, my heart pounding in my chest. The air inside was thick, filled with tension. Emily was sitting on the couch, her head down, her body tense, like she was waiting for something. Waiting for me, maybe. When she saw me, her eyes widened, but she didn't get up. She didn't move. She just stared at me, like she wasn't sure if she could trust what she was seeing. Emily, I said softly, my voice filled with urgency. Come on. We're leaving. She didn't say anything for a moment. She just looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and uncertainty. I could see the doubt in her eyes. She didn't believe it yet. She didn't believe I could protect her. We have to go, I said again, my voice steady, trying to keep the panic out of it. You don't have to stay here. You don't have to face this alone anymore. She hesitated, and for a moment, I thought she might say no. But then, slowly, she stood up, her hands trembling slightly as she looked at me. You're really going to take me away from all this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll protect you, I said, my voice firm. I promise. She nodded slowly, as if she was still unsure, but I could see the trust in her eyes. The man in the other room didn't say anything, just watched us silently as we walked toward the door. I wasn't sure what was waiting for us outside, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let her face it alone. We stepped out into the cold night, the door slamming shut behind us, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I finally felt like I was doing something right. But as I led Emily toward the bike, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Whoever was after her was still out there, and they wouldn't stop. But as long as I had breath in my lungs, I wasn't going to stop either. I revved the engine of the Harley, the growl of the motorcycle slicing through the cold night air. Emily was holding on tight behind me, her small hands wrapped around my waist. I could feel her trembling, but there was something else in her touch, something new, something that felt like trust. She had been through so much, and I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing the right thing. We were moving forward. Together. As we sped down the empty streets, my mind raced. I didn't know where we would go, where we would hide, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let her go back to that life. I had to protect her, no matter the cost. The storm had passed, but the aftermath still hung in the air, unsettling, dangerous. I wasn't sure who was after us, but I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. The people who were after Emily weren't the kind of people you could just outrun. They were connected, dangerous, and they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. But they hadn't reckoned with me. I glanced over my shoulder to make sure Emily was still there, still with me. She was, her face partially hidden by the scarf she had wrapped around her head to shield herself from the wind. The trust in her eyes was something I hadn't seen in a long time. I had promised her safety, and I wasn't going to break that promise. We kept riding, the world flashing by in a blur of streetlights and shadows. The town was behind us now, and as the road stretched out ahead, I knew we were leaving it all behind. Leaving the danger, the fear, the uncertainty. But I knew it wasn't enough to just leave. We needed to get as far away as possible. I needed to find a place where we could lay low, where we could regroup and figure out what came next. I didn't know how long it would take before they found us, but I had no intentions of making it easy for them. The bike roared through the darkened roads, the wind whipping past my face. But there was a strange sense of peace in the chaos. We weren't safe yet, but for the first time since this whole mess started, I felt like we had a chance. Emily's grip tightened on me as we rode, and I could feel the warmth of her body pressed against mine, steady and constant. We weren't out of the woods yet, but we were together, and that was what mattered. We rode for hours, the town far behind us now, and as the sun started to rise, the horizon ahead finally offered something more than just endless road. A quiet town, a place that felt distant from everything. I slowed down, my instincts telling me this might be the place to stop, the place to lay low. I could feel Emily's eyes on me as I brought the bike to a halt. She didn't say anything, but I could tell she was as uncertain as I was. This town, this quiet little place, could be the fresh start we needed, or it could be another dead end. I didn't know, but I wasn't going to let that stop us. We had made it this far. We could make it the rest of the way. I killed the engine and got off the bike, stretching my sore legs. Emily climbed off slowly, her movements stiff but determined. She looked around, taking in the small, quiet town, the sleepy streets, the houses lined up on either side. There was something almost peaceful about it, a sense of calm that felt like it had been untouched by the chaos we had just left behind. But I couldn't let myself relax. Not yet. Stay close, I said to Emily, my voice low but firm. She nodded, her eyes meeting mine with a quiet resolve. I'm not going anywhere, she said softly. I gave her a small smile, though I knew the hardest part was still ahead. We walked toward a small diner that sat at the corner of the street. The windows were fogged up, but the warm light inside beckoned us. I held the door open for Emily, and we stepped inside. The diner was empty except for a few older locals sitting at the counter. The waitress behind the counter looked up as we entered, her eyes scanning us briefly before she offered a tired smile. "What can I get for you?" she asked, her voice soft, almost as if she hadn't had a real conversation in days. I glanced at Emily, who was still looking around, trying to get a sense of where we were. "Just coffee," I said, my voice steady. Emily didn't speak, but I could see her eyes starting to relax, just a little. "Make it two," I added, taking a seat at the counter. The waitress nodded and walked off to prepare our drinks. Emily sat down next to me, her body still tense, but not as much as before. I could feel the weight of the world slowly starting to lift, just a little. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that we were still in this fight together. "We'll figure it out," I said to Emily, my voice quieter now. "One step at a time." She nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup as she stared ahead. I wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, or how long it would take before the people who were after her found us. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were moving toward something. I didn't know what that something was, but I wasn't about to let it slip away. I reached over and gently placed my hand on hers. "I'm not leaving you," I said. "Not ever." Emily looked up at me, her eyes filled with a quiet gratitude, and for a moment, the weight of the world felt a little less heavy. Whatever came next, we'd face it together. And that was enough for me.